Senior analyst had processed over 3,000 species assessments in his career. The routine never changed. New species applied for Galactic Council membership. His team ran them through the Terror Index, and within a week they had a threat rating. Class 1 for the truly peaceful species. Class 7 for the most aggressive. In 12,000 years of galactic civilization, no species had ever broken the scale. The humans seemed ordinary enough when they walked into his office. Ambassador smiled warmly and placed a data crystal on his desk. "Our complete historical database," she said. "Feel free to cross-reference anything you need." 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Most species were hesitant about sharing their full history. Humans seemed almost eager. He inserted the crystal into his terminal and began the standard protocols. Military history first. The numbers were high, certainly, but Earth had been divided into competing nations for most of its development. That always inflated the statistics. He made notes and moved on. Aggression metrics came back average. Tactical thinking slightly above average. Social bonding extremely high, which was good. Humans formed strong pack bonds, cared for their weak, and showed remarkable cooperation. Was preparing to assign a Class 4 rating when his junior researcher entered his office, her scales pale with distress. "Senior analyst," she said, her voice shaking, "I need you to review something." Gestured for her to continue. Had only been with the team for 5 cycles, but she was thorough. She pulled up a file on his screen. "I was investigating human violence outside of warfare," she explained. "I found references to something called serial killers. I thought it was a translation error at first." Leaned forward, reading the definition. His translator struggled with the concept. "Recreational murder specialist. That cannot be correct." "It's not recreational," said quietly. "Or it is, but that's not the right word. These are humans who kill other humans repeatedly, often over years or decades, usually with no material motive. They do it because they want to, because they enjoy it." Felt his skin temperature drop. "How many cases are we talking about? 10, 20. Pulled up another file. "I've documented over 300 cases just from the last century, but senior analyst, I think there are thousands more. Their databases go back centuries. They have entire law enforcement divisions dedicated to hunting these individuals." The office felt smaller suddenly. Had reviewed violent species before. They had a gladiatorial culture. The settled disputes through ritual combat, but those were structured, cultural expressions of aggression. This was different. This was humans hunting other humans for sport, for pleasure, for reasons the Terror Index wasn't designed to categorize. "Show me the worst cases," said. Over the next 3 hours walked him through file after file. The Zodiac Killer, who murdered at least 5 people and was never caught. Jack the Ripper, who terrorized London in 1888. Who killed 52 people over 12 years. Ted Bundy, who confessed to 30 murders but likely committed many more. What disturbed most wasn't the body counts. It was the methodology. These humans planned their kills. They learned from mistakes. They adapted to law enforcement pressure. They were intelligent, functional members of society who held jobs and maintained relationships while secretly hunting their own kind. "How did their civilization survive this?" asked. "Most species with significant predation collapse before achieving." Pulled up another set of files. They developed countermeasures, forensic science, criminal psychology, behavioral profiling. They created entire fields of study specifically to identify and catch these predators. Stood and walked to his window, looking out over the council chambers. The Galactic Council represented 400 species. In the entire collective database, there were 173 documented cases of serial murder across all species combined, spanning 1,000 years. Earth had produced more serial killers in a single decade than the rest of the galaxy had seen in a millennium. "We need a comprehensive census," he said. "I want to know how many of these individuals existed throughout human history. I want to know how many are active right now, and I want to know how human civilians cope with this threat. Hesitated. Senior analyst, the terror index has already started processing the data. The neural processors are overheating. The algorithm isn't designed for this scenario. What do you mean? The terror index assumes that predation is aberrant behavior, that it represents a tiny statistical anomaly. But with humans, the numbers suggest it's almost a constant. There are always serial killers active somewhere on Earth. The system can't calculate a threat rating when the threat is endemic to the species. Return to his desk and access the terror index directly. Error messages cascaded across his screen. The algorithm was trying to assign a rating but kept hitting logical contradictions. If serial murder was this common among humans, they should have been too violent to achieve civilization. But they had achieved civilization. They had thrived. They had reached the stars. Unless the serial killers weren't the real story. He said slowly, "How many humans are dedicated to stopping serial killers?" He pulled up a new file. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has a division called the Behavioral Analysis Unit. They employ hundreds of profilers who study serial killers specifically. Local police departments have homicide divisions. There are cold case units that work on unsolved murders, some decades old. Victim advocacy groups. Forensic laboratories. If I had to estimate based on the database, there are tens of thousands of humans whose primary job is hunting serial killers. And civilians. They're taught from childhood to be cautious of strangers. They have protocols for safety. They share information about dangerous individuals. They create massive databases of unsolved cases. Some families spend decades trying to identify their loved ones' killers. Sat down heavily. He had misunderstood the situation entirely. Humanity hadn't survived despite their serial killers. They had survived because they had evolved an entire infrastructure to fight them. They hadn't accepted predation as an unfortunate reality. They had declared war on it. "I need to call an emergency session with the Galactic Council," he said. Scales paled further. Senior analyst, emergency sessions are only called for existential threats. Exactly. Began drafting his request. We need the council to understand what we're dealing with, not just the serial killers themselves, but the implications. If this is what humans do to threats within their own species, what will they do to external enemies? He sent the request and received confirmation within minutes. The council would convene in 2 days, asked to prepare a comprehensive presentation. He sent a message to Ambassador, requesting her presence at the emergency session. Her response came quickly. "Is everything all right? Did we fail the assessment?" Stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "Please attend the session. There are questions the council needs answered." That night couldn't rest. He kept reviewing the files, trying to understand. He found documentation of human entertainment based on serial killers, movies, television shows, podcasts, books, entire industries built around examining these predators, understanding them, sometimes even celebrating them in a perverse way. He found memorial websites for victims, maintained decades after their deaths. He found cold case databases where volunteers analyzed evidence, hopping to identify killers long gone. He found forensic technologies developed specifically to catch murderers from crimes committed before the technology existed. Humanity had turned the existence of serial killers into a driver of scientific advancement. They had developed DNA analysis, improved fingerprint techniques, created psychological profiling, and built massive interconnected databases, all in service of hunting the humans who hunted other humans. The more learned, the more disturbed he became, not because humans were violent. He had reviewed violent species before, but because humans were persistent. They never stopped hunting. They maintained lists of unsolved murders going back centuries. They still worked on identifying Jack the Ripper, a killer from 1888. They had cold case units that spent decades on single investigations. When the terror index crashed completely the next morning, wasn't surprised. The algorithm had encountered a logical impossibility. By every metric, humanity should have been too dangerous to itself to survive. But they had not only survived, they had built a civilization that specifically targeted the thing that should have destroyed them. The emergency session was in 24 hours, had no idea what threat rating to recommend. The terror index, for the first time in its 12,000-year history, had no answer to give. The Galactic Council chambers could hold 10,000 beings comfortably. Today it felt crowded with only 400 representatives present. Stood at the central podium, his presentation hovering in holographic displays around the circular room. Ambassador sat in the human delegation area, her expression curious but not concerned. She had no idea what was coming. Began with the basic statistics. Earth's human population is approximately 8 billion. At any given time, experts estimate there are between 2,000 and 4,000 active serial killers operating undetected. The chamber erupted immediately. Delegates rose from their seats, voices overlapping in a dozen languages. The Meridian Collective's representative, a being of pure crystallized thought, simply collapsed, their consciousness fragmenting from shock. Medical drones rushed to assist. The council speaker called for order, but it took several minutes for the noise to die down. Waited patiently. He had expected this reaction. "That's impossible," the ambassador said, their voice translator struggling to convey their distress. 2,000 predators hunting actively. Their civilization would collapse. The math doesn't work. "And yet," said, pulling up another display, "throughout human history, conservative estimates suggest there have been over 500,000 serial killers. Some researchers believe the number is higher." A military commander stood. For context, the entire Galactic Council has documented fewer than 200 cases of serial murder across all member species combined over the past millennium. My own species, which you classify as Class 6 aggressive, has recorded 17 cases in our entire written history. 17. Not 17,000. 17. Ambassador stood, her face pale. With respect, these numbers are not representative of typical human experience. Serial killers are outliers. They're rare. Most people will never encounter one. "Most people," the ambassador repeated, seizing on the word. "You said most, not all, not an infinitesimal chance. Most." Hesitated. "Well, statistically speaking, the majority of humans will never directly encounter a serial killer in their lifetime." The ambassador's computational appendages moved rapidly, calculating probabilities. "If your numbers are accurate, every human knows someone who has been affected. This level of ambient threat would require evolutionary adaptations. Your children must be taught survival protocols from birth." "We teach them not to talk to strangers," said defensively. "Basic safety measures. It's just common sense." The chamber fell silent. The concept of teaching children that members of their own species might hunt them was so alien that most delegates couldn't process it. The representative, whose species communicated through color changes, had turned a sickly gray. Pulled up another display. "I've documented human cultural responses to serial killers. They create entertainment based on them, documentaries, dramatic recreations, fictional stories inspired by real cases. Some of these killers become famous. Ted Bundy's trial was televised to millions. Jeffrey's case is studied in universities. The Zodiac Killer, never caught or identified, has been the subject of countless books and films. They celebrate their predators." The delegate sounded disgusted, which was notable given this own gladiatorial culture. "No," said quickly. "We don't celebrate them. We study them. We try to understand them so we can stop them. The documentaries and books are educational." "Some humans," said, pulling up more files, "collect serial killer memorabilia. They write letters to imprisoned killers. They attend trials as spectators. There are murder museums, tour of killing sites, an entire industry built around examining these predators. Stood again. You're cherry-picking the worst examples. Yes, there are people with morbid interests, but that's not mainstream human culture. The vast majority of humans are horrified by serial killers. We dedicate enormous resources to catching them. Show them, said quietly. Looked confused. Show them what? Show them the resources. Pulled up her own data crystal and accessed the human delegation's files. The Federal Bureau of Investigation employs hundreds of behavioral analysts who specialize in serial murder. Every major city has a homicide division. We have forensic laboratories in every state, cold case units that work on unsolved murders, some decades old, victim advocacy groups, support networks for families, annual conferences where law enforcement shares information, international databases tracking violent criminals. How many humans, the commander asked, are dedicated specifically to hunting serial killers? Calculated quickly. If you count direct law enforcement, forensic specialists, researchers, advocates, and support personnel, probably tens of thousands, maybe more. The silence stretched. Finally, a small delegate from the Whisper Collective spoke, their voice barely audible. You have more humans hunting the killers than we have documented killers in our entire galactic history. Of course, said, what else would we do? Accept it, the Whisper delegate said. Adapt, evolve resistance. Every species with significant predation either goes extinct or evolves beyond it. You've done neither. You've created an industry around hunting your own predators. Pulled up his final display. The humans maintain databases of unsolved murders going back centuries. They still investigate the Jack the Ripper case from 1888. They develop new technologies specifically to solve old crimes. They've created entire fields of science driven by the need to identify and stop serial killers. DNA analysis, advanced fingerprinting, forensic psychology, criminal profiling. All of these exist because humans needed tools to hunt humans who kill humans. The council speaker, an ancient AI that had governed the council for 3,000 years, finally spoke. The terror index has crashed. Our systems cannot calculate a threat rating for humanity. They represent a logical contradiction. By all metrics, they should be too dangerous to themselves to survive. Yet they have not only survived, they have thrived. Analyst, what is your recommendation? Looked at Ambassador. She seemed smaller now, perhaps understanding for the first time how alien her species appeared to the rest of the galaxy. I need more time, he said. There's something here I don't fully understand yet. The council speaker called for a recess. Delegates filed out, many moving quickly to distance themselves from the human delegation. Approached the podium, her expression difficult to read. You make us sound like monsters, she said quietly. No, replied. I make you sound like survivors, but I don't understand how you survived. That's what frightens the council. We survived because we fight back, said. When something hunts us, we hunt it back. We don't accept predation. We don't adapt to it. We eliminate it. But you haven't eliminated it. You said yourself there are thousands of active serial killers right now. We haven't eliminated it yet, corrected. But we never stop trying. We maintain lists of unsolved cases. We develop new techniques. We train new investigators. My grandfather was a cold case detective. He worked one case for 30 years. One case. One killer. He died before solving it, but his partner continued the work. They identified the killer 15 years after my grandfather's death, using DNA technology that didn't exist when the murders happened. Felt something shift in his understanding. You hunt across decades. We hunt across centuries if we have to, said. There's a museum in Washington, D.C. that displays artifacts from unsolved cases going back to the 1800s. We still work those cases. We still try to identify the victims, the killers. We don't have a statute of limitations on murder. We don't forget. We don't move on. We hunt until we find them. And if you applied that same persistence to external threats, asked, to enemies outside your species? His expression hardened. Serial killers hunt individuals. They're patient, intelligent, and they learn from their mistakes. We've spent centuries learning to hunt them. We've gotten very good at it. When we go to war, we don't just hunt individuals. We hunt the entire system that created the threat. We don't just defeat enemies. We make sure they can never threaten anyone again. Understood now why the terror index had broken. It was designed to measure aggression, territorial instinct, predatory behavior. But humanity's threat didn't come from any of those things. It came from persistence, from the absolute refusal to accept that some hunts cannot be won. The council reconvenes tomorrow, he said. I'll have a recommendation by then. Nodded and left, returned to his office and spent the night reviewing everything again. Not looking at the killers this time, but at the hunters, at the humans who dedicated their lives to stopping them, at the families who waited decades for justice, at the scientists who developed new techniques, at the cold case units that never gave up. When the terror index had crashed, it had displayed one final message before shutting down. Error. Species designates self as both predator and prey. Primary evolutionary adaptation. Persistence hunting of persistence hunters. Threat rating undefined. Recommend new classification system. Began drafting his recommendation. The council wouldn't like it, but they needed to understand what they were really looking at. Not a violent species, a hunting species, one that had turned its hunting instincts inward and survived the experience. The council chambers were tense when session resumed. Delegates had spent the night reviewing the human data for themselves. Some had requested additional security. Others had filed formal complaints about humanity's application. The militant coalition, representing the galaxy's warrior species, had called for an immediate vote to reject human membership. Took the podium again. His scales had changed color overnight, a sign of stress that his colleagues would recognize. He had barely slept, but he had found something important. I have reviewed humanity's history in detail, he began, and I believe we have been asking the wrong question. We've been trying to determine if humans are dangerous. That's not useful. Every species is dangerous under the right circumstances. The real question is this: what did humanity evolve to hunt? The council speaker gestured for him to continue. Most species evolved to hunt specific prey. The hunted herd animals on their plains, the hunted aerial creatures in their deep canyons. The being synthetic were designed by their creators to optimize systems. But humans evolved as persistence hunters. They didn't outrun their prey. They outlasted it. They tracked animals for days until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. We know this, the commander said. It's in their basic profile. What's your point? My point is that humans applied this same hunting strategy to hunting each other. Serial killers are human persistence hunters who prey on other humans, and the humans who hunt them are persistence hunters who have specialized in hunting persistence hunters. Pulled up a new display. I spent last night reviewing case files, not of the killers but of the investigators who caught them. Detective John's son was murdered in 1981. He spent the rest of his life helping to catch fugitives and solve cold cases. He personally assisted in the capture of over 1,000 criminals. 1,000. Another display appeared. The Golden State Killer committed his crimes in the 1970s and 1980s. He was caught in 2018, more than 30 years later, because investigators never stopped looking. They used genealogy databases, new DNA techniques, and decades of preserved evidence. They tracked him across 40 years. That's the persistence hunting you mentioned, the ambassador said. But how does this address the threat assessment? Because it means that when humans identify a threat, they don't stop hunting until the threat is eliminated. It doesn't matter if it takes 1 year or 100 years. They maintain institutional memory. They pass cases between generations. They develop new technologies specifically to solve old problems. The terror index crashed because it couldn't categorize a species that treats hunting as an indefinite process. The Whisper Collective's delegate spoke softly. You're saying they would apply this same approach to external enemies? I'm saying they already do, replied. Human military history shows the same pattern. They don't just win battles, they track enemy leadership for years. They develop intelligence networks that span decades. During their Second World War, they hunted war criminals for 70 years. Some were found and prosecuted when they were in their 90s. The humans never stopped looking. Ambassador stood. With respect, analyst, you're making us sound obsessive. You are obsessive, said simply. That's not a criticism, it's an observation. When they face an enemy, they fight until they win or lose. When they face an enemy, they calculate odds and commit resources accordingly. When humans face an enemy, they hunt until the enemy no longer exists. Those are fundamentally different approaches. The council speaker's lights pulsed thoughtfully. Analyst, you were supposed to provide a threat rating recommendation. What is your assessment? The terror index cannot provide a traditional rating because humanity doesn't fit traditional categories. They're not exceptionally aggressive. They're not particularly territorial. They're not even unusual in their capacity for violence. What makes them unique is persistence. They're a species that evolved to never give up on a hunt, and they've turned that trait into a cultural imperative. So what do we do with them? The militant coalition's commander asked. We can't assign them a rating. We can't predict how they'll behave in the galactic community. Do we reject their application? Before could answer, the ancient AI of the council speaker did something unprecedented. It descended from its elevated platform to the main floor, its holographic form coalescing into a more focused shape. I have existed for 3,000 years, it said. I have processed every major decision this council has made in that time. I have reviewed the human data independently. Analyst is correct. Humans don't fit our existing categories, but I believe they should be admitted to the Galactic Council. The chamber erupted in noise again. The council speaker raised a hand, and silence fell immediately. The galaxy is not static, the speaker continued. We face new threats constantly, the swarm at our outer borders, the dark matter anomalies in the southern sectors, challenges that require new thinking. I propose we admit humanity with a unique classification, not a threat rating, a strategic designation, Class Omega. What does that mean? The ambassador asked. It means that when something is hunting us, we send humans to hunt it back. The commander stood slowly. I have been reviewing human military doctrine while we spoke. Their entire strategic philosophy is based on concepts they developed hunting serial killers. They profile enemies to predict behavior. They track targets across years and continents. They don't plan battles. They plan campaigns that might last decades. During their Cold War, they maintained surveillance and intelligence operations for 46 years. Nearly half a century of continuous hunting, without a single shot fired in direct conflict. He turned to Ambassador. Your species frightens us not because you're violent, but because you're patient. Most species want immediate results. Humans are willing to work toward a goal they might never personally see completed. That's something the galaxy has never encountered before. Ambassador looked around the chamber. I don't know what to say. We're not special. We're just persistent because we have to be. Serial killers taught us that giving up means more victims. War taught us that half measures create future conflicts. We learn to finish what we start. Exactly, the council speaker said. Which is why I'm calling for a vote. Admit humanity to the Galactic Council with Class Omega designation, or reject their application entirely. The vote took an hour. Delegates caucused, debated, argued. The militant coalition argued for rejection, claiming humanity was too unpredictable. The diplomatic circle argued for acceptance, nodding that humanity's persistence could be directed toward peaceful goals. The Science Assembly argued that rejecting humanity would mean losing access to their investigative techniques and forensic sciences. In the end, the vote came down to a narrow margin. The Science Assembly's eldest member, an artificial intelligence that had existed for 4,000 years, cast the deciding vote. "I vote to accept," it said, "not despite humanity's history with serial killers, but because of it. They are a species that learned to identify predatory behavior, track it across time and space, and stop it. In a galaxy facing unknown threats, we need specialists in hunting the seemingly. I vote to admit humanity to the Galactic Council." The resolution passed. Ambassador stood motionless, seeming overwhelmed, approached her after the session ended. "Congratulations," he said, "though I'm not certain you wanted this classification." "What does it mean in practical terms?" asked. "It means the Council will look to humanity for expertise in long-term threat tracking, pattern analysis, and persistence hunting. You'll be consulted on security threats. You'll train other species in investigative techniques. And when something particularly dangerous appears, you'll be the ones we send to hunt it." Nodded slowly. "We can do that. We've been doing it to ourselves for." "I know," said. "That's what convinced the Council. You're already the galaxy's best hunters. You just didn't know you were hunting for everyone else yet." 6 months later, the swarm began its invasion from dark space. The swarm was ancient, predatory, and had destroyed civilizations across the galaxy for. They used hit-and-run tactics, striking without warning and disappearing before defenses could respond. No one had ever successfully tracked them back to their source. The Galactic Council's response was unprecedented. They didn't mobilize fleets. They didn't build defensive barriers. They established the Predation Response Task Force, headquartered on Earth, staffed primarily by humans, former cold case detectives, criminal profilers, pattern analysts, people who had spent careers hunting The task force logo was simple, a fingerprint overlaid with a star map. Their motto, suggested by a detective who had worked cold cases for 40 years, was direct: "We never stop looking." The swarm had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years by being impossible to track. They struck and vanished. They left no traces. They had evolved to be perfect raiders. But they had never encountered a species that considered decades-long hunts to be normal. They had never faced investigators who would track a single microscopic piece of evidence across star systems. They had never met humans who maintained databases of every attack, every pattern, every deviation, looking for the one mistake that would reveal the source. It took 3 years. 3 years of patient observation, data collection, and analysis. They made their mistake eventually. They all did. The humans found the pattern, tracked it back through 50 years of attacks, and located the swarm's hidden nursery in a nebula no one had thought to search. The Galactic Fleet destroyed the nursery in a single day. But the hunt had taken 3 years of persistence. 3 years of humans doing what they did best, refusing to give up. When asked how they had succeeded where thousands of years of galactic civilization had failed, the head of the task force, a former FBI profiler named Sarah Martinez, said something that would become famous across the galaxy. There were apex predators, but so were Ted Bundy, John Wayne, and the Zodiac Killer. We've been hunting apex predators our entire history. This was just one more name on the list. The Terror Index was never rebuilt. In its place, the Galactic Council maintained the Predation Response Task Force, ready to hunt whatever the galaxy threw at them next. And the humans, finally understanding their place in the galactic community, did what they had always done. They maintained their databases, trained new investigators, and waited patiently for the next threat to appear. Because humans had learned long ago that the hunt never really ends. It just gets bigger.